Hello and welcome to Rotted Reviews, and today it's time to take another Rotted request where my patrons decide what movies I'm going to be watching and reviewing. And today's request comes to us from Patron Ben Grimm, who asked me to take a look at the 2011 movie Detention. According to Ben, this is a movie that he picked because it's a film that people either love or love to hate, starring a bunch of actors people love to hate. Detention has a lot of elements I would usually hate in other movies, but somehow works for me here no matter how many subplots get added to it. It's an interesting take on it, and it's an interesting reasoning, and I kind of found myself in a very weird position with this one because I was kind of in between. When films get this divisive and people either love them or hate them or love to hate them, it becomes a little tricky to walk the middle of the road, and I did so quite unintentionally because, truth be told, I really hated this movie when I first started watching it. Written and directed by Joseph Kahn and also written by Mark Palermo, this movie kind of sort of starts out by introducing us to the character of Riley, who is a teenage girl who is trying to navigate the stresses of high school life. Meanwhile, she thinks of herself, not entirely inaccurately, as one of the biggest losers the school has ever known. She finds herself in one unfortunate predicament after another and constantly finds herself on the receiving end of social outcast status. And a horror movie is being released centered around the masked killer of 𝗘𝗾�61. Unfortunately for this school and the students within, an actual killer is going around on the loose dressed as the 𝗘𝗾𝗃 character. So the nature of this movie at its most basic is about Riley trying to navigate high school life in a kind of a comedy slash horror slash drama kind of way, along with her classmates while this killer is on the loose. So why did I hate it so much? Well, that has a lot to do with tone. Okay, so here's the thing, is a movie's beginning is critically important in so many ways. On the most basic level of screenwriting functionality in terms of the characters and the plot and how it was written on the page, you have about 10 minutes to establish who your characters are, what their aspirations are, and then throw curveballs their way to create conflict and prevent them from reaching their goals. Not every movie has to abide by this format, but a surprising number do, and it's tried and it's true. And if you kind of use that as a template, you'll be surprised at just how many Hollywood movies are out there that do exactly this. There's a reason for it. It works well. But just like you have about 10 minutes to establish the characters and the goals and the conflict and so forth, you also only have about 3 to 5 minutes to establish your tone. The first 5 minutes of any movie is a lot like its own trailer. You are establishing what the visual representation is going to look like. If it's a horror, what the horror elements are going to look like. If it's a horror comedy, what kind of laughs are you going to be going for? Is it based on a dichotomy between serious characters and an outlandish situation, or vice versa? It's a lot to kind of put in front of the audience and let them know, hey, this is the movie that you're going to be getting. And just like the whole screenwriting, first 10 minutes, character, what have you, not every movie has to do this either. In fact, a great many successful ones will actually turn it on its head. From Dusk Till Dawn is a great example of a movie that establishes its tone in the first 5 minutes and then completely changes it midway through. Nevertheless, with Detention, the first 5 minutes of this film really had me hating it with the tone. It was a horror comedy where the comedy elements just didn't work for me. It very much felt like a too quirky for its own good, too cool for school kind of thing, with exceptionally intelligent and self-aware characters butting heads against early outlandish situations in a way that didn't really feel that funny. For the most part, I was just kind of hating everything that I was seeing on the screen. It was loud, it was brash, it was obnoxious. It actually had me looking up the filmography of Joseph Kahn, the director, and I saw that a lot of his directorial efforts and his entire catalog come from music videos. And I was like, okay, yeah, that tracks. So that kind of establishes what my thoughts were on this movie. I was really kind of gearing up to thrash it in a review. So what caused me to, well, sort of turn around on it? Look, if this movie had gone on with the energy that it was putting out in the beginning all the way through until the end credits, this would have been a very negative review for me. There was a lot of technical proficiency, there was a lot to like about it, but the characters and the story were chief among the things that I really hated. And that's a tough thing to get past. I was going to give it some, pretty decent technical scores and so forth, but For the most part, it just wasn't working. But the fact of the matter is, it didn't stick with that energy. It shifted. And instead of shifting down and bringing things back down to earth and making them a little bit more relatable and so forth, which might have worked, this did the opposite. It ramped up. And considering that I didn't like it because it was loud and brash and obnoxious, that was a really interesting choice. But it proved to be a choice that was moderately successful because I wound up actually starting to like this movie in spite of myself. It was ramping up the comedy to the point where we started to go from a very self-aware, very hip kind of teen drama comedy kind of thing into something that was almost more Zucker Brothers, Airplane, Top Secret-esque. And on that level, once it started actually getting really absurd, I kind of found myself liking it. It had to break through that barrier. Where it was at the beginning was this weird kind of uncanny valley area of serious and absurd. And it leaned into the absurd, ramped it up, and it broke through that barrier. And I'm so happy that it did. I'm still not the biggest fan of it. It's not going to be a movie that I recommend to everybody out there. But I did find myself enjoying it in spite of myself. And that's why I'm really kind of glad that I continued watching it with an open mind. I'm glad that I continued watching it at all. I'm glad that this was recommended for a review for me because honestly, if I wasn't watching this movie for a review, and I make a point that any movie I review, I watch to the end credits, period. No matter what, no matter how painful it gets. But if this wasn't for a review, if I just happened to be kicking this on a Friday night trying to find something to watch, I probably would have turned it off. And I don't mind admitting in a very honest way that had I done that, I would have been missing out. So yeah, Detention winds up in a really weird place for me. How do I recommend a movie that I admit would have turned off in the first 15 minutes and then wound up over through patience and perseverance liking but not loving? It's not exactly a glowing review, but I still kind of find myself in a position of being rather surprised by it. If you're a fan of the outlandish and the wacky and horror comedies that aren't afraid to go to really weird places, then I would say that this is a movie to, at the very least, try out. And if it's not working for you in the first 15 minutes, maybe stick with it. I'm glad that I did, and I'm glad that Ben recommended this to me, which is honestly quite flabbergasting. So there you go. As much of a recommendation as I could possibly offer for the 2011 movie Detention. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I look forward to seeing you on my next review. Remember, next time you want to watch a horror movie, first make sure that it's good and rotted.